Hey everyone, it's Zach back with a new mortgage video. Hope you all have had a happy Labor Day weekend. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, welcome to my channel. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I'll try to demystify all things mortgage related. If you find this content helpful, please like and subscribe. So on today's video, I wanted to take a little bit of a step back from some of the stuff that's going on and talk about some history of countries that have lost independence with their central bank and the effects those had. Mortgage rates can seem like they're moving kind of sporadically, but a big influence on them is how credible their central bank is and how credible their country is economically, how much foreign investment is coming into that country. And as you'll see in these examples, when governments pressure their central banks to just do whatever the government wants, it results in higher inflation, higher borrowing costs as a result of that higher inflation, and a general loss of trust and capital flight. So I'll talk through a couple examples of that and why I think it would be even worse for the United States if this happened the way it has in these other countries. So let's start with Argentina. Argentina has had a long history of this kind of back and forth independence versus loss of independence with their central bank. 18th century, early 19th century, Argentina was actually a very strong economy. They had a lot of foreign capital coming into their country. After World War II, they kind of went up and down, and they, at their worst, reached a state of hyperinflation in 1989, where they had 3,000% year-over-year inflation. And after that, they actually had a really strong period from 1991 to 2001, where they fixed the price of the peso to the US dollar. And that, in large part, was what brought their inflation down to as low as 5%. However, ultimately, they ended up defaulting on their debts and went back to political pressure to cut interest rates. And now they're back into this world of hyperinflation where they've had inflation since COVID of over 200%. Now, Turkey, it's a little more condensed, this history. The Central Bank of Turkey successfully brought inflation down from 70% after 2001 to as low as 8 or 9% in 2010. However, similar to what we're seeing in the United States, the president of Turkey started calling for the cutting of interest rates, calling high interest rates the mother and father of all evil at one point. And ultimately, he got full control over who was in charge of the central bank of Turkey and fired 4 different heads who would not cut rates at the level that he would like. Finally, he got someone to cut interest rates even while inflation stayed high, even while inflation was still high by most metrics. And now inflation has spiked in Turkey to as high as 80%. And many independent estimates think it's higher than that. That's another part of this, is typically you see a loss of accurate data in evaluating these countries' economies at this point. Now, I also want to talk about a couple examples in the United States. In the early 70s, leading up to the 1972 presidential election, we have now recordings showing Richard Nixon pressuring the head of the Federal Reserve at that time, Arthur Burns, into lowering the Fed funding rate because he knew it would be popular and he knew that it would help him get elected, which it did. And as a result of that, we had extreme spikes in inflation throughout the 70s. And when it ended, it was the exact opposite of that situation. In the early 80s, you had Paul Volcker take over. And rather than putting political pressure on Volcker to lower rates or not raise rates, Ronald Reagan was completely supportive of Volcker raising interest rates to an unprecedented level, both before and after. The Fed has never held their rates higher than Volcker did, and it succeeded in bringing the U.S. inflation down finally. It's not a fixed thing where you lose independence with the Fed and then suddenly it's gone, it can never come back. However, there's a different situation with the United States now versus certainly Argentina or Turkey, in the sense that the United States has the world's reserve currency. And because of that, we are privileged in a number of ways, including that most foreign countries want to hold on to dollars. Now, if we were to lose the status as the reserve currency, which general loss of trust that inevitably will come from the loss of a independent central bank, it would be catastrophic for us because we're used to kind of being the default number one economy. We've had that since World War II. And while it might not look quite as extreme as Argentina or Turkey in terms of, I doubt we would ever see like 200% or 3,000% inflation, I think the loss of being kind of the default currency, the default country and economy that foreign investors invest in would kind of shock people. We're used to this current level, and if we immediately just lost foreign investment, that's going to spike the treasury prices, and as a result, that's also going to spike mortgage rates. And while I don't think we're quite there yet, again, with things like Lisa Cook and the inevitable removal of Jerome Powell next year and who he is replaced with, those are steps towards what these other countries have seen. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot a comment below or call, text, or email me. But thanks for tuning into this video, and I'll see you next time.